material. I mean, usually, this stuff is all mediated for us, right? We go to school, and the professor mediates. We don't actually have to handle the poem. We just get the stuff, and they explain to us what it means. But what I have here is raw poetic material. And so I have on, don't try this at home unless you have the proper gloves and protective eyewear.
There's need the hat.
No, I mean, a hat would be good, but you don't always need a hat because, well, the hat in the lab, maybe one of those little cloth hats that they wear. So this is the new protective eyewear, actually. The problem when you need corrective lenses and have protective eyewear. Sometimes, you know, two great tastes sometimes don't taste great together. Ever notice that they don't put chocolate on grapefruit? This is a piece. This is essentially a scientific experimental poem. For those of us who have read poems that have been called experimental, but in which the poet who calls it experimental really means dabbling in something I haven't tried before. That's experimental in the sense of like taking drugs. And if you keep doing that stuff for like 10 years or more, you're not an experimenter, you're addicted. This is an experimental poem which I invented and which many people have since learned about through others who have followed the format. So, it's entitled The Cry of the Dayliner. A few years ago, my friend Tony Doerr wrote two scientific poems in which he made liberal use of both the dictionary and the work of Jackson McClough. Finding myself at a crossroads, I determined to try my hand at such a project. This is how I proceed. In the Romantic canon, Keats's notion of negative capability is held up as an example of a near perfect description of the process in which the poem moves. That is, his poem, Ode to the Nightingale. First, from the real world to the poet, and then from the poet to the poem, and then finally from the poem to the reader. A lot of exchanges. However, I was unhappy with the notion that all this was negative and based upon absence and loss. I wanted a poetic process based on presence. I wanted a positive capability. I thought that if I could substitute the opposite word for each word written by Keats, that I would have the negation of his negation, and thus a positive. When I was about 95% finished with the poem, I was fortunate enough to be sitting with Jackson McClough at 7A in Manhattan, and I told him of my project. Jackson gave me a funny look, rubbed his head, and said, "Now what would you want to do a crazy thing like that for?" To which I replied, because I thought I might get a good poem out of it. Ever gracious, Jackson agreed to look at what I had, after which he agreed that I might have gotten an interesting poem from it. Ever diligent, he corrected my spelling. Incorporated his corrections below, however, any lingering errors are all mine and must not be attributed to some imagined oversight on Jackson's part. I'm Jack.